Hello, everybody. Welcome in. My name's Will Klingenmeier. I'm joined now by my good friends Scott Ezell and Doug Newton. We're going to be sharing some stories and discussing a new project that Scott and I created called The Front Lines of the War that's coming out on August 10th. And after this live stream, which is going to go about 30 minutes, we're going to premiere a video that we made. So you might consider sticking around for that. And thanks again for being here. We're looking forward to this. And with that, I'd like to turn it to my collaborator, Scott Ezell.
Thanks, Will, and hello, everybody. It's nice to be here. It's a real pleasure to present this album that Will and I have been working on for about a year now, Spoken Words and Sound Art. I'm a poet and multi-genre artist, and I've been working on documenting issues of civil conflict and industrial development in the China-Southeast Asia border region for about the past 10 years. And the text of this project is based on my experience of a government offensive against civilians and a rebel army in Shan State, Burma. That's the basis of the text of this project, and Will supplied the sound. We're joined today by my good friend and another collaborator, Douglas Newton, who's going to be facilitating our conversation. Hey, Doug.
Hello, good to see you both. And good to see everybody. Good to not see the people who are joining us. Glad you're all here. So for the last several years, I've been working to try to heal trauma. I'm a therapist. I'm also a musician. Scott and I had a band together for a period of time in Taiwan. We've worked on various creative projects together as well. I'm also a comparative literature grad school dropout among my non-credentials. And it's such a pleasure to be here to explore this work. This work, The Front Lines of the War, is really a tour de force that explores power dynamics. It explores the nature of war. It really delves deeply into the idea of what it might feel like to be in a marginalized community where you're not recognized, perhaps feeling unseen by the rest of the world. And it's been Scott's trajectory for a number of years, really, to be exploring marginalized communities and between state peoples, and to really delve into these projects with a kind of gonzo journalism approach to poetry of witness as well. Really kind of a niche that I've never seen any other writer inhabit quite as thoroughly and with such alacrity. The Front Lines of the War, as I see it, really is a way to help the rest of us who are not in a conflict zone understand some of the ways that injustices are transacted, some of the look and feel of what it might be like to be in that kind of area, and to juxtapose that to the terms of the world that are sometimes seemingly cut away or separate from those war experiences. So I have so many questions for you both, but I guess my first question is for you, Scott, which is to say, like, what led you into this kind of approach to the work? The language is so jarring at times and so disarming as well, and so personal. What led you to develop this kind of style where you seem to like put large and the very large and the very small together in the context of this work?
Well, as I said, the words are primarily based on my first-person experience in a combat zone, which happened almost by accident. I was over a period of years. I was just trying to explore border zones, border issues, and in at the end of 2015, I was in Myanmar. I was in the north of Myanmar, and I was trying to get close to the China border. Not even realizing that this was a long-standing conflict zone, but I didn't realize that a government offensive against the Shan State Army had just been launched. I was invited to visit the Shan State Army headquarters, and until I got there, I had no idea that there was an offensive in progress. I suddenly found myself in a battle zone. So I was just trying to transmit what I could in the moment. And at the same time, it was part of a larger process that I'd been engaged in for some years of trying to understand these dynamics, trying to express them, process them for myself and in the way that I see them unfolding in the world. So I think that's how the sort of conceptual and the concrete come together. And thank you for that observation. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, no problem. When I was listening to this work, I had already read the poems in print, but listening to the work with Will's background really called to mind for me the Allen Ginsberg Kronos Quartet collaboration in 1996. And for those who aren't familiar, Allen Ginsberg, the beat poet from San Francisco, collaborated with the Seattle string quartet, the Kronos Quartet, known for doing edgy projects. And they put together really an amazing avant-garde, cutting-edge interpretation of the classic American poem, Howl. And for those of you who are not familiar with that work, go check it out. It's really a tour de force in its own right. But that immediately came to mind for me, and mostly because of that quality of having this sound bed underneath your work, which seemed to enrich and draw forward some of the tension and the visceral aspects of the work. I'm curious to know how you settled on that particular approach, Will, and maybe in answering this question, you could also talk a little bit about how you met one another and some of your background.
Yeah, sure. Were you going to say something, Scott?
No, I think you're up for this one, Will.
Well, like you, Doug, I mean, I'd read the chapbook a lot. Scott gave me a copy back in 2019, and so I'd read it a lot before I even started to do the audio, and so I'd already internalized it and a lot of the words. And then when it came to wanting to do something like this, it was really just about listening to Scott's readings and trying to complement them or provide the sonic counterpart to the reading. So it wasn't like really a premeditated thing. It was just a very deep response to those readings and listening to his voice, and then just fleshing it out, seeing what was working.
There's a lot of kismet to the way that you both work. I mean, Scott seemed to kind of accidentally find himself on the front lines of the war. And then he also seemed to have accidentally found himself a motorcycle.
Yep.
Is that right?
We accidentally met each other actually right on the border of Laos and Thailand back in 2014. It's just, 5 minutes difference, probably would have never met each other, but we were just walking on the street. Scott's like 6'6" or something. Huge guy, sticks out like a sore thumb, and I passed him, and I was doing a time lapse at the time of the Mekong River and the sunset, and we just said hi and where you from? Oh, California, Colorado, and then 10 minutes later we're drinking beer loud, talking about analog tape machines and expired film photography, and I'm like, wow, this is a cool guy out here. Like, he's a kindred spirit for sure. So we just hit it off right from the start. And yeah, I'd been riding a motorbike around, and I was trying to get into Thailand. I failed, and so it ended up going to Scott.
Yeah, I would say that Will's going to be an absolute unique person in my life, because within 5 minutes of meeting, he offered to give me a motorcycle. He couldn't get it across the border into Thailand, so he just passed it on to me. I wrote it around a while, and then I donated it to some NGO. But yeah, that's how we met. And then the way this project evolved was we had the opportunity to do a performance event at University of California, San Diego. That was the first time that we actually started putting sound and words together. And then I think, Will read these poems, and I think he must have felt sorry for me or something. And he started talking about getting together and doing a collaboration. So I was able to do the recordings of the poems on my own, and I sent them to Will. And I think one of the interesting things about his process not only is the way that it slots beautifully together, but also the way that in some cases he used my actual voice recordings to sort of like organically seed the sound that he was creating within his system.
Yeah, it does have the feeling when you listen to it from the outside, as somebody who wasn't part of the process of making it. It feels really organic in nature as a fit. The poetry itself and the sound bed underneath it. It sounds like a kind of a sound landscape rather than a musical accompaniment. And the complementarity there is really greater than the sum of its parts. I want to talk about that in a little bit, but I realized that, Scott, when I was listening more recently to the audio version of your poetry, I thought of Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And the reason that quote came to mind for me is that I feel like you're trying to help those of us who may never go to Myanmar, those of us who live in the suburbs, including myself, in a relatively safe situation where we're not wondering where we can go to be safe, where we're not a mother on a motorcycle, nursing a baby while actually trying to cruise away from conflict, where we're not in that state of insecurity. I feel like your poetry really brings that wholesale to our door, so to speak, to expand our consciousness, and to really introduce that sense of injustice there and how it relates to our lives. Can you just elaborate for me a little bit on how that particular aspect of your poetry, came to be something that you included? Did you consciously stitch that together, like with that kind of juxtaposition of the first world and the third world, in terms of the reference to how the front lines of the war can be stitched into the logo of your shirt, or for instance, that sense that you have ongoing through the work of that contrast between those in power and those who are running away from the terms of that exertion of power.
Yeah, thank you for those observations. I did feel, in this case and in other areas throughout this documentation, what I call like a lyric documentation project, I did often feel like I was experiencing things that were very far from my background, my upbringing, which I, of course, carry within myself. So having those experiences created this sense of contrast, and I did feel like it was important to somehow try to convey those back to the other side. And I think it goes. I often had the sense that it was going both ways. I kind of sometimes felt like I was a conduit for information to go both ways, or at least in some cases for maybe people to feel like they were being seen or acknowledged. And at the same time, I do want to transmit these back to the place where I come from, or to people that didn't have this direct experience, as a way to let everybody know what's going on, or to create the experience of a side of the world that mostly is kind of like sealed off from us. And one of the central themes that Will and I were working with throughout this project is is one of the lines from the title from the title poem, which is everybody's on the front lines of the war. And I often have the sense that we are all implicated in these dynamics, in these patterns, patterns of consumption, patterns of resource extraction. Oftentimes, resource extraction is directly linked to conflict zones. The objects that we consume or purchase are often very far away from the reality of how they were produced. For example, with materials in an iPhone that might have been mined in a conflict zone in the Congo. So yeah, it's sort of trying to make a connection, and hopefully that goes both ways.
It's interesting because you and I had talked briefly about the difference in presentation between, let's say, a straightforward, I don't know how straightforward it is, but maybe a New York Times article that explores the conflicts going on in certain areas, sort of a dispatch from the front lines that's written in a would-be objective collection of facts, a journalistic style, and your style, which is for me somewhat along the lines of gonzo journalism. I don't know if you relate your work so much to that particular approach, but I suppose like the notion that you're involved and your internal processes, your consciousness around what you're experiencing, and your ability to sort of lay that out for folks is very much a way to sort of bring a different sense, a different understanding, a different perception of what it might be like to be on the front, and therefore remind us all through those associations and personal interweaving, if you like, that we are all on the front lines of the war.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been an honor to work with Will in this project, and I think most of the credit really goes to him. My goal in all this stuff is often to try to create not just to disseminate information, but to create an experience. And I think the album does that maybe more than it does on the page, because it's sort of happening in real time when you listen to it. And Will's work with the sound really brought out I think an experiential aspect of the words.
And let's get into that sound piece, Will. So you work in you've done so much music. I mean, your room there is surrounded with musical instruments, and your understanding of the syntax of music elements as they are aggregated through computer systems is deep and interesting. Could you introduce, for the non-expert, a little bit of how you work and what that was like in particular as applied to this project?
Yeah. Well, thanks. I definitely don't think all the credit goes to me, by the way. Yeah, so I work a lot of different ways, or can work a lot of different ways that are meaningful to me. But for this one, I used something called Kima, which is a program, software, hardware companionship that is expansive and has a wonderful amount of varieties of the way it can be used. But there's graphic code and other types of small talk and event languages and so forth. But essentially what happened is everything was long takes. Scott gave me his reading and there's no editing, and that whole thing came in and I performed live to it, and then that whole thing, that whole take or poem was then recombined with the other ones, so both sides of the album are one long continuous take. So it does have a kind of more organic feel, because it really was a performance for me to play it and a performance for Scott to read it, and because there's no chopping up of separate things, it's smoother, I guess.
That's so interesting. So it's one continuous thing. So
Yep.
what was it like leaving yourself open to those potential flaws or the kind of edge of leaving things, in one continuous take.
Yeah. Well, it is. It's like you're right on the edge, right? It's like you're walking along the edge of a cliff when you're 20 minutes, 25 minutes into a take. And if you mess up, you just got to ditch it and go back to the beginning. So to me, it just lends itself to being more thoughtful, more mindful of the whole process, and not doing 10 other things at the same time. It's like when you're recording, you just laser focus on recording.
Mm.
That
Yeah.
was actually one of the funny things about our collaborative process, because to be honest, I don't really understand all the tools and the terms of how Will makes music. And it's not like you can just go in and tweak one thing if it doesn't sound quite right. So whenever I had some suggestion, it meant that Will had to go in and like spend hours to create a new take. And I also want to mention, I don't think we've brought this up yet, that the reason that this was done in 2 long takes is because we designed this as a cassette, an analog cassette. That's one of the ways that is available. And so it's, side 1 and side 2, and Will performed and produced each of those as one long take.
And I can see how that would be a great way to listen to the work. I haven't listened to it that way. I have listened to it in sections. But I can see why having that continuity could be really helpful for just having that kind of experience of the poetry and the sound bed or the music together.
Yeah, and of course we realize that not everybody's going to be able to pop a cassette in a tape player. But tapes have come back. They're kind of like what vinyl was going through some years ago. But on our Bandcamp pages, which is the primary platform that we're using for this, each of the tracks is available to listen to separately, and then at the bottom we've each put the complete side 1 and side 2. So if you want to listen to it in the way that it was conceived, you can go to the Bandcamp pages, and you can listen to the whole side.
Yep. All that info is in the description of this video.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. And you mentioned a video. This discussion precedes the premiere of a video, which is really another, and it sounds like an overused word out of my mouth as I say it, but another tour de force. Really, the video combines the poetry and the sound bed that Will has produced with Scott's photographs, and the effect behind the photographs, and I'm not going to spoil it for viewers because it's really something to behold, is yet another amazing approach which enriches and enhances the experience of poetry. So that's quite a treat and not to be missed. So how's that going to work, Will? What happens with the video?
Yeah, basically everybody who's here now, if you stick around here in just a few minutes, I'm going to end this live stream. And then if you wait, YouTube says 2 or 3 seconds, it's going to live redirect you. So you basically don't have to do anything except for wait for a few seconds. And I haven't done it before, but if all goes according to plan, it should just start counting down and playing the video. And yeah.
Yeah, this is exciting that we're finally premiering this video. It's another case where Will was using a similar process, and every time I asked for a tweak, it was hours of work for him. But I'd just like to mention the content of the photos briefly. These are mostly my photos from the China Southeast Asia border zone over many years. They're focused on things like dams, mining projects, some of the conflict zones, and then as well there are U.S. skyscrapers, U.S. cityscapes, road and railway construction projects, border walls, and I just want to mention that this kind of goes back to the theme of what we've been talking about, how everybody's implicated in conflict and in some of the destructive aspects of industrial development. So I hope that there's kind of a unifying geometry that runs through these photos, and the photos are from a diverse number of areas, including Laos, Burma, Taiwan, Southwest China, Guatemala, Vietnam, Tibet, and the U.S.-Mexico border. So, so I hope that this will, I hope that this creates a good visual accompaniment. And I want to add that Will also did a really amazing form of diffusion in the video process. So I hope everybody's going to stick around for that.
Yeah, fantastic. You know, just to get back to the theme, Scott, of everyone is on the front lines of the war. As a privileged white male American living in the suburbs with a decent income, you know, the things that came to my mind immediately around the idea that I was somehow also on the front lines of the war is the shrinking of distance. Just the way that your work and the accompaniment together kind of brings the war right to your doorstep, so that you can't really deny the humanity. It's not something that's distant, that's happening far away. There's a sense that these people could be your brother, your friend, your uncle, your sister, etc. And so the humanity really that is, and the sense that we're all together as human beings really comes through this. And I wanted to read a small section of the poetry, really just to try to capture that sense of humanity and tenderness that we don't necessarily always read about in a standard journalistic approach to warfare. And this is, by the way, from Scenes from the Front. Scott, you wrote, hilltop outposts looking down upon a valley, rice fields quilt the earth between the army lines, 50 caliber machine gun pointed at the sky, waiting for God to appear in the form of a helicopter gunship and fill everyone's belly with stars. A soldier sits on a crate of ammo, grenade launcher between his knees, stroking the comb of a rooster, its wing metallic orange and green, eyes half closed, his lips touch its beak, fingers circle its neck like he wants to take it with him when he falls through the muck and trash of the perimeter trench to a vault of eternity.
Thank you, Doug. That was beautiful to hear from you, and I hope everybody will check it all out. I think, Will, we might be right at the end of our time limit.
That's what it's looking like, yeah.
Yeah.
So
sorry to be abrupt, but I just want to say thank you to everybody in case we do get cut off here.
Exactly.
Thank you,
yeah.
Especially Doug, for being here with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a million, Doug, and thanks, Scott, for being a wonderful collaborator and standing on the right side of history.
Yeah, and thanks to both of you for producing the work.
Yep.
It's been a pleasure to have a small role in introducing it to a larger public.
Right on.
Very good, guys. Well, let's start this video. If you're watching now, stick around. I'm gonna start this video right now.